It began with a single photograph and a trembling hand. Through a grainy periscope, a Japanese intelligence officer saw something that defied all logic of war: a massive, unarmed vessel. As his own nation scraped pine trees for fuel and prepared young men for one-way missions, this mysterious ship was dedicated to a single, unbelievable purpose, one that would prove more devastating to Japanese morale than any bomb. March 11, 1945, a day etched in time at Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu, Japan, where the hand of an intelligence officer quivered as he peered at reconnaissance photographs from submarine I-47, capturing an observation that would relentlessly haunt the Japanese Naval Command for the remainder of the war. Concrete vessel observed, the report stated, no armament visible. Heavy refrigeration equipment. Multiple small craft conducting transfers. Classification, unknown logistics vessel. Through the grainy images captured by a periscope near Ulithi Atoll, he had documented something that fundamentally contradicted every principle the Imperial Japanese Navy held about the priorities of warfare. At this very moment, pilots at his own airfield were painstakingly extracting pine root oil to supplement their dwindling aviation fuel, a desperate national program employing 34,000 distillation units that would ultimately yield a mere 3,000 barrels in total, while mechanics were draining industrial alcohol from any available equipment just to power their aircraft. In stark contrast, the Americans had deployed what could only be described as a non-combat vessel, a ship dedicated entirely to the singular purpose of refrigeration. On the runway, 24 Yokosuka P-1Y-1 Francis bombers sat poised for Operation 10 No. 2. The pilots, many of whom had less than 50 hours of flight training, were preparing to fly their explosives-laden aircraft directly into the American fleet at Ulithi. What none of them could possibly know was that they were about to attack an enemy that had constructed a $1 million floating factory, a marvel of engineering producing 500 gallons of ice cream per shift, 5 tons of frozen dessert daily, all while Japanese forces were reduced to scraping the bark from pine trees for a meager source of fuel. The first unsettling hints of this reality had emerged through prisoner interrogations following the monumental Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. When the carrier Zuikaku sank on October 25, American destroyers moved in to rescue Japanese sailors from the oil-slicked waters. The destroyers Wakatsuki and Koa pulled 862 officers and men from the sea, while 842 of their crew members tragically perished. These survivors, fully expecting a swift execution, instead reported receiving medical treatment and food, including something utterly foreign to their experience: a frozen cream served in simple metal cups. One survivor's account, meticulously preserved in Allied interrogation files, stated, "The American sailor brought me what he called ice cream. I had heard of this dessert, but never had I tasted it." Here, in the wake of the greatest naval battle in history, Americans were serving frozen desserts to the very enemies they had been trying to kill only moments before. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, the very creator of the kamikaze special attack units, vehemently suppressed such reports. It was imperative that his pilots continue to believe that the Americans were weak, that they were incapable of enduring true hardship. How else could the vaunted Japanese spirit ever hope to overcome such staggering industrial superiority? The unvarnished truth, he knew, would completely destroy what little remained of their fighting morale. The first documented Japanese observation of this phenomenon came through the cold, objective lens of submarine reconnaissance. In December 1944, submarine I-47, under the command of Zenji Orita, surfaced near Ulithi for a periscope reconnaissance mission before launching its Kaiten-manned torpedoes. Orita, who commanded I-47 from July 10, 1944, through the war's end and conducted multiple special attack missions, recorded in his log, now preserved in the Japanese Naval Archives, at 0630 hours, large concrete vessel observed approximately 80 m no armament heavy refrigeration equipment on deck, multiple small craft conducting transfers. What Orita had spotted was the U.S. Navy's barge, refrigerated, large, the BRL, a vessel ingeniously converted from an Army concrete barge at a cost of $1 million, a sum equivalent to a staggering $17.2 million in 2024. This single vessel was capable of producing 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 minutes, with a storage capacity of 2,000 gallons at a frigid -15 degrees Fahrenheit. The barge operated relentlessly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, churning out 500 gallons per shift, which amounted to approximately 5 tons of frozen dessert daily. By January 1945, Japan's situation had deteriorated to a state of desperation almost beyond Western comprehension. Fuel had become so scarce that the mighty battleship Yamato could only conduct its training exercises while at anchor, a drastic measure to conserve every precious drop of oil. The Pine Root Oil Program, a massive national effort that employed 34,000 distillation units and mobilized 400,000 workers, including millions of school children, ultimately produced a paltry 3,000 barrels of aviation fuel from 70,000 barrels of pine oil, a quantity less than what the U.S. Navy consumed in a single day of operations. The 343rd Naval Air Group, the Kokutai, Japan's last elite fighter unit commanded by Captain Minoru Genda, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, was struggling with the debilitating effects of severe malnutrition. Genda had assumed command of this unit on January 15, 1945, tasked with the critical mission of clearing the airspace for the impending kamikaze operations. While specific calorie counts from this period are not documented, pilots began reporting night blindness due to vitamin deficiency, their reflexes had slowed, and they were physically unable to withstand the intense G-forces of combat maneuvers. Captain Genda himself lamented in his operational reports, "My pilots' eyes fail them at night. Malnutrition has stolen their vision. They shake during combat maneuvers from weakness. Yet they face an enemy who grows stronger with each passing day." The contrast was most starkly illustrated within the kamikaze units as they prepared for their final, irreversible missions. These pilots, many of them mere teenagers with only 40 to 50 hours of flight training, were given final meals of rice balls, dried fish, and a ceremonial sip of sake before embarking on their one-way missions. They wore senenbari, thousand-stitch belts sewn by women as a form of spiritual protection, though a grim understanding prevailed that no cloth could offer protection against the hail of anti-aircraft fire. At Kanoya Air Base on March 11, 1945, the kamikaze pilots wrote their death poems before boarding their aircraft. One pilot's poem, now preserved in the Kanoya Air Base Museum, reads, "Like cherry blossoms in the spring, let us fall pure and radiant." These young men died attempting to crash into the ships at Ulithi, where the USS Randolph, CV-15, suffered damage at 2007 hours that very evening. One Francis bomber successfully struck the carrier's stern, killing 25 sailors and wounding 105. The carrier was repaired and returned to service in just 3 weeks, utilizing 29 tons of structural steel, including I-beams salvaged from a Japanese sugar mill on Saipan, during which time her crew consumed an estimated 3,000 gallons of ice cream from the base's facilities. Ulithi itself represented a concept that was simply beyond Japanese comprehension. This tiny coral atoll, often omitted from maps, had been transformed into the world's largest naval facility. By March 1945, when the kamikaze attacks commenced, 722 ships were anchored in its lagoon, more vessels than the entire Japanese Navy had ever possessed at its peak. This was the staging point for the impending invasion of Okinawa. The base facilities defied all Japanese understanding of wartime logistics. Complete machine shops housed in floating dry docks, a fleet post office handling 20 tons of mail daily, movie theaters showing the latest Hollywood films, baseball diamonds on Mogmog Island, a bakery ship producing fresh bread continuously, the USS Abaton distilling seawater and baking pies, and of course, the ice cream barge, producing its 5 tons of frozen dessert daily. The ice cream barge became a legend among American sailors. Destroyer crews, whose ships lacked the necessary equipment, would send boats with empty containers, returning with gallons of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry ice cream. The barge served everyone equally, from admirals to seamen, a true democracy delivered through dairy. Japanese intelligence struggled to comprehend American supply priorities. Captain Tomichi Hara, Japan's most successful destroyer commander, who survived all major battles from Pearl Harbor to the war's end, later wrote about his disbelief upon learning of American comfort provisions. Hara had commanded the destroyers Amatsukes and Shigeru, participating in 14 major engagements. "We thought at first the intelligence was wrong," Hara wrote in his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain. "Ships dedicated to ice cream while we scraped for fuel. It was incomprehensible that any navy would prioritize such luxury during total war." Naval Intelligence reviewed intercepted American supply manifests that seemed to be in code. Surely, ice cream mix was a euphemism for ammunition, chocolate syrup, a code for fuel oil, and strawberry topping, a representation of medical supplies. No military force, they reasoned, would prioritize actual dessert ingredients during intense combat operations. But the evidence continued to accumulate relentlessly. Prisoners of war consistently reported ice cream aboard every American vessel larger than a destroyer. Reconnaissance photos showed refrigerated vessels at every American base. Supply manifests consistently included tonnage for morale supplies that exceeded the total Japanese food rations for entire fleets. Commander Makitsura Hashimoto of submarine I-58, who would later sink the USS Indianapolis on July 30, 1945, provided the most detailed Japanese observations. During earlier reconnaissance missions at American bases, he had observed through his periscope what seemed impossible. In his memoir, Sunk, The Story of the Japanese Submarine Fleet, 1941-1945, Hashimoto wrote, "The Americans operated floating cities of abundance. While we counted our last torpedoes and rationed fuel by the liter, they maintained peacetime routines in wartime. This was a strength we never imagined, the power to be comfortable during apocalypse." His executive officer recorded similar observations. "We saw sailors in lines at what appeared to be refreshment stands. Ships transferred not fuel or ammunition, but white containers we later learned contained ice cream. They fought a different war than we did." Japanese pilots who were shot down and rescued by Americans reported treatment that contradicted everything they had been told. During Operation Kikusui, the 10 massed kamikaze attacks on Okinawa between April and June 1945, captured pilots provided remarkable testimony. One pilot, captured after engine failure prevented his suicide attack, recorded in post-war interrogation files. "The destroyer conducted normal operations during our attack. No panic among the crew. Men at regular stations except gunners. White uniformed sailors continued serving food. The ship's routine continued. This was not the desperate enemy we expected." What these pilots witnessed, though they did not understand it at the time, was American confidence in their anti-aircraft defenses, allowing normal shipboard routines, including food service, to continue during attacks. While kamikaze pilots approached on their death missions, American sailors maintained ice cream service on deck. By 1945, American ice cream production in the Pacific had reached an industrial scale that dwarfed entire Japanese food programs. The American production numbers were staggering. The Navy barge at Ulithi produced 500 gallons daily, 10 gallons every 7 minutes. 3 Army ice cream barges produced a combined 1,500 gallons. Every carrier, battleship, and cruiser had its own ice cream machines. Base facilities had multiple plants per location. 135 million pounds of dehydrated mix were shipped in 1943 alone, and the Army Quartermaster Corps' annual production reached 80 million gallons for the military. In stark contrast, the Japanese reality was one of extreme scarcity. Pine root oil yielded a total of only 3,000 barrels from 34,000 distillation units. Aviation fuel reserves had fallen below 1,500,000 barrels by 1945. Civilian calorie intake had dropped from a pre-war 2,000 to 1,680 by the summer of 1945. Tokyo rations were a mere 775 calories daily for 6 months in 1946, and pilot training fuel was limited to 40 to 50 hours due to the severe shortage. For perspective, the entire Japanese military's daily rice ration for home island forces totaled less tonnage than American ice cream consumption in the Pacific Theater alone. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who personally approved the ice cream barge, understood something the Japanese military hierarchy couldn't accept: that morale wasn't built solely on ideology and sacrifice. In a classified memo, Nimitz wrote, "The Japanese expect our men to endure their conditions and break. We will demonstrate that American industrial might extends to crew comfort. A sailor who knows his country can provide ice cream in combat fights with different confidence than one expecting only hardship." This philosophy extended throughout the Pacific Fleet. The USS Lexington incident at the Coral Sea on May 8, 1942, where sailors raided the ice cream stores before abandoning ship, became a legend. Sailors literally scooped ice cream into their helmets before entering life rafts, demonstrating priorities incomprehensible to a Japanese military culture built on suffering as a virtue. Japanese naval officers who learned about American ice cream operations faced an impossible choice. How could they maintain fighting spirit when the truth would destroy morale? How could they explain that while Japanese sailors received 315 grams of rice daily, when available, Americans consumed 5 tons of ice cream from a single barge? Rear Admiral Mato Megaki, who commanded battleship operations and would lead the final kamikaze mission on August 15, 1945, wrote in his diary after receiving intelligence reports of American comfort levels, "If such reports are true, we have misunderstood this war entirely. Spirit cannot overcome an enemy who brings luxury to battle." The information was classified above top secret. Officers who learned of it were sworn to absolute silence. But truth has a way of seeping through the walls of secrecy, spreading through the fleet in whispers and rumors. Japanese radar operators and observers noted B-29 bombers circling at high altitude for no tactical reason. Post-war evidence revealed that the crews were making ice cream, mixing powdered milk, sugar, and cocoa in ammunition cans and using the -50 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures at 30,000 feet to freeze the mixture while the turbulence churned it. This level of confidence, making dessert over enemy territory that was desperately launching fighters powered by pine root oil, represented a civilizational surplus applied to warfare. While Japanese mechanics drained hydraulic fluid to burn as emergency fuel, American air crews improvised ice cream makers at bombing altitude. Operation Kikusui sent 10 massive kamikaze waves against the American fleet at Okinawa between April 6 and June 22, 1945. A total of 1,465 kamikaze aircraft and 4,000 Japanese pilots died in these attacks. Japanese pilots flew obsolete aircraft powered by an alcohol-diluted fuel that reduced engine performance by 30%. Their final meals consisted of rice balls and water, often their only substantial food in days. After the massive April 6, 1945 attack involving 355 kamikaze aircraft that sank 6 ships and damaged 22 others, American fleet reports noted, "Morale remains high. Ice cream consumption increased 40% post-action. The psychological impact of ice cream after combat cannot be overstated. It represented normalcy, comfort, and home." Japanese naval personnel captured at Okinawa, 11,250 of whom surrendered in total, provided detailed accounts that shattered Japanese assumptions. One destroyer officer, pulled from the water after his ship sank, reported through interpreters, "I expected torture, perhaps execution, the treatment we gave American prisoners. Instead, a young American sailor, younger than my youngest brother, brought me ice cream, vanilla, in a metal cup. He seemed embarrassed they had run out of chocolate. I cried not from gratitude, but from the understanding that we had already lost. A nation that provides ice cream to enemies had won before fighting began." These accounts, suppressed during the war but documented in occupation records, revealed a gulf between the two forces that exceeded anything Japanese command had imagined. During the occupation starting in August 1945, American forces distributed ice cream to Japanese children, many of whom were tasting it for the first time in their lives. The psychological impact proved profound. Everything the military government had told the Japanese people about American barbarism and weakness was disproven by a simple frozen dessert. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace with 64 confirmed victories, tasted ice cream for the first time at a U.S. air base in 1946. He later wrote in his memoir, Samurai, "I understood finally why we lost. We fought believing suffering made us strong. They fought with the confidence of abundance. We thought comfort was weakness. They knew comfort was a right their industry could guarantee anywhere." The statistical reality of two different wars tells the complete story of two nations fighting entirely different kinds of war. The American production in 1945 included a Navy ice cream barge producing 500 gallons daily, 10 gallons per 7 minutes, 3 Army barges producing a combined 1,500 gallons daily, a total military ice cream production of 80 million gallons annually, 135 million pounds of dehydrated mix shipped globally in 1943. Every ship above destroyer size equipped with ice cream machines, and a cost of $1 million per barge, equivalent to $17.2 million in 2024. The Japanese reality in 1945 was starkly different: a rice ration of 315 grams per sailor when available, a total of 3,000 barrels of pine root oil produced from 70,000 barrels of raw pine oil, 400,000 workers mobilized for the pine root program, 34,000 distillation units deployed nationwide. Pilot training reduced to 40 to 50 hours versus over 500 pre-war, and a fuel quality of a 30% alcohol mixture that reduced engine performance. For a Japanese military culture built on Bushido, the way of the warrior, and the acceptance of suffering as spiritual purification, the American ice cream ships represented something incomprehensible. They saw comfort not as weakness but as a strength multiplier, and abundance not as decadence but as a strategic advantage. Captain Mitsuo Fukuda, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war, later converted to Christianity and became a pacifist. When asked about his transformation, he said, "I learned Americans fed ice cream to their enemies. Not just food, but luxury food. This was not the barbaric enemy we were told about. This was a civilization so confident in victory they could afford kindness and comfort during war." The ice cream ships challenged every assumption about warfare that Japanese military culture held sacred. At a 1985 U.S.-Japan veteran reunion in Hawaii, the cultural gap remained evident. Former Seabee Robert Mitchell, who had worked on the Ulithi base, was asked about the ice cream barge by Japanese veterans who still struggled to understand it 40 years later. Mitchell shrugged. "We figured boys fighting needed ice cream. Didn't seem special at the time. It was just what you did, take care of the troops. If we could build it, why wouldn't we?" This casual attitude, that ice cream was so normal, so expected that its provision in wartime seemed unremarkable, illustrated the gulf between the navies better than any battle statistics. Former kamikaze pilot trainer Tadamasa Itatsu, who attended the reunion, responded, "We trained boys to die with empty stomachs. You trained boys to live with full stomachs and dessert. This difference explains everything about the war." Dr. John Dower, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning Embracing Defeat, Japan in the Wake of World War II, wrote, "The ice cream barge at Ulithi was worth more than a fleet of battleships as a demonstration of American power. It said, we can afford this. We have already won. We are simply waiting for you to realize it." Military historian Richard Frank noted, "Japanese forces fought expecting to die gloriously. American forces fought expecting to live comfortably. This wasn't just a different strategy. It was a different civilization's approach to warfare." Today, at the Kanoya Air Base Museum in Kagoshima Prefecture, a memorial to the kamikaze pilots who flew from this base, a small, often overlooked placard mentions the American ice cream ships. Added in the 1990s, it provides context for understanding the impossible disparity these pilots faced. The museum displays a kamikaze pilot's final meal, a small rice ball, pickled vegetables, and a cup of sake, next to a photograph of the American ice cream barge at Ulithi obtained from U.S. Navy archives. No explanation is needed. The image tells the entire story of the Pacific War. Museum curator Takeshi Yamada explained, "We added this display because visitors, especially young people, couldn't understand how we lost so completely. When they see that America built ships just for ice cream while we scraped pine trees for fuel, they understand it wasn't just a military defeat. It was the collision of scarcity with abundance. The story of Japanese commanders discovering American ice cream ships reveals the fundamental nature of power in modern warfare. Japan believed power came from spirit, from will, from the ability to endure unlimited suffering.